Can you imagine what it would be like for you not to be president?
Actually, this question is not as simple as it may seem. It's an acid test for any leader. If you can say goodbye to living in palaces and go back to your old apartment, this means that your feet are still on the ground. I can say about myself that, yes, I can live without this office.
Russian authorities have determined that the terrorists are concentrating in the mountains near the border.
3 more villages have been taken hostage by the terrorists.
According to reliable sources, the authorities believe that Basayev is leading the terrorists in Dagestan.
The citizens of the village are being used like a human shield.
General Prosecutor of Russia has initiated criminal proceedings.
It seems that every day the terrorists are finding new villages to hold as hostages.
I will not sit down so that I don't overstay my welcome. The situation in Dagestan, in the Caucasus, is extremely serious. I just got back from there. It's very serious. It's very serious. It looks like we may lose Dagestan. There has been little or no coordination so far. And for some reason, everybody keeps talking about political will. So I had to go there yesterday and tell them that I assume full responsibility for the operation. Now back to our current affairs. I saw the president this morning. He thanked me for my hard work and signed an executive order dismissing me as prime minister. Vladimir Putin, the Secretary of the Security Council and FSB chief, will be acting prime minister. He's a good candidate, fit for the job. I would like to wish him good luck. Only luck, because he's got everything else.
The man that Boris Yeltsin has now chosen to lead his battered government is virtually unknown to the public. A former KGB officer and boss of the National Security Council, Vladimir Putin. Even more surprising is that Yeltsin says that Putin should be Russia's next president when he steps down next year.
People had no confidence in the government whatsoever. The war was raging in the Caucasus. It wasn't just the Caucasus. There were terrorist attacks all over the country. I'm sure you remember that. It was only, what, 15, 14 years ago?
Mountains of Dagestan, rebels engage in a hit-and-run mortar attack on Russian troops.
Here in Moscow, the conflict is the first big test for the acting Prime Minister Vladimir Putin. Putin has predicted that Russia could restore its grip on Dagestan in less than 2 weeks.
Back then, I didn't have the authority to make decisions. I mean, I had to get involved, but I didn't have complete authority. Of course, I realized what kind of responsibility that was. There was just one question on my mind. I'm not even sure I want to say this on camera. I was thinking, what if we fail? How am I going to live with it? Anyway, I decided there was no alternative. We had to go all the way.
I never heard of Putin prior to 1999. The first Chechen campaign was plagued with failures, and sometimes even betrayals.
Вот, а в 99 году, уже когда Чебан-Махи, Каран-Махи, вот это наступление...
It was in 1999 when Islamists invaded Dagestan
Там я впервые услышал фамилию нашего...
that I first heard his name.
У нас командир взвода
I
Владимир...
remember how my platoon commander said, "There is this new guy who came here."
Он там зашел в какую-то палатку к генералам, и они там подняли тост.
He met with the generals and offered a toast to victory.
Очень хочется по русской традиции.
Now, in keeping with Russian and Dagestan traditions,
Поднять
I would like to raise a glass in memory of those who were killed.
Секундочку, секундочку.
Wait.
Очень хочется
I would like to raise a glass to the health of the wounded and to those with us today.
Но у нас с вами впереди много
But,
проблем.
as you're well aware,
большие задачи.
we have our work cut out
Вы
for us.
знаете. Вы знаете, что планирует противник. И мы это с вами тоже знаем. Какие провокации ожидаются.
You know that our enemies regularly carry out attacks in various places.
Мы с вами не имеем права позволить.
We can't afford to relax, not even for a second. Otherwise, we'd let down those who gave their lives for our victory. So, I suggest we put this glass down today. We will certainly drink to them, but we'll do it later.
Но пить будем потом. Потом, тогда, когда эти задачи принципиально.
After we've achieved our primary objectives.
Поэтому я предлагаю сейчас по походному перекусу.
So let's have a quick meal and get back to work.
Рюмку поставил на стол, и я помню, что это вызвало у командира
So
взвода.
he put the glass down. My commander was surprised and impressed.
Сказал, что вот, возможно, может быть, поет
He
иначе.
then said, maybe this campaign will be different from the previous one.
Она в мужицком понимании какую-то...
This glass Putin put down sent a strong message.
Потом, когда уже спустя несколько дней
A
подразделение,
few days later, when airstrikes on Islamist positions inside Chechnya began,
тогда уже стало понятно, что это вот эта рюмка, поставленная на стол, она имела совершенно
it
очевидный...
became clear that Putin meant business when he put that glass down.
We'll chase those terrorists down no matter where they are. If they are at an airport, we'll get them at an airport. If they are in the toilet, we'll get them right there in the toilet. This is it. No more talk.
What is going on in Chechnya, and believe very strongly that there cannot be a military solution to it, that it's an issue that has to be handled politically, and we are urging the Russians to handle it in a political way. And that they need to deal with this issue politically by talking to the Chechen leaders.
There are two types of Russian soldiers in Chechnya, dead ones and those about to die.
There was no other way to stop those terrorists. You can't reason with them. Back when I was an FSB chief, I used to go over intelligence reports, including intercepted communications of international terrorists. And I remember how they wrote in those messages that it was a unique opportunity for the Caucasus to break away from Russia. It's now or never, they said. And it was clear to us as well that either we put up a fight now and defend Russia's territorial integrity, or we'll never be able to save our country. Back then, almost everybody in the world, except perhaps for our people who weren't that interested and weren't aware of what was going on, my colleagues, presidents and prime ministers, later told me that the whole world pretty much expected that Russia would cease to exist in its current form. The only question was, when does this happen? And what will happen to Russia's nuclear arsenal?
It was December 31st, 1999. At 10 a.m., I got a call from Boris Yeltsin's office telling me to be there in 30 minutes. I came, and I was one of those witnessing the transfer of power, including the nuclear briefcase. I remember that day well. On December 31st, I was invited to have brunch with the president. I think there were about 8 people present. And then, all of a sudden, a TV set was brought in. You remember what TV sets looked like back then? Big and heavy. So one of those was brought in, and then Boris Yeltsin and Vladimir Putin entered the room. We all sat down, and they turned it on.
Я ухожу.
I've decided to step down early.
Я понял, что мне необходимо.
I know I have to.
Россия должна.
Russia should enter the new millennium led by new politicians,
С новыми лицами, с новыми
new figures, new, capable, strong, and vigorous people. This is how we found out that President Yeltsin stepped down and appointed Vladimir Putin acting president.
После этого, Владимир пригласил меня уже в кремлевский кабинет и сказал, что...
After that, Putin invited me to his office and said it would be nice to visit our troops on New Year's Day.
Моральное состояние
Morale was pretty low,
было достаточно...
so we had to do something to boost it
Дух военнослужащих...
and inspire our troops.
При этом, естественно, нужно было обеспечить...
Of course, we also had to provide security because we were flying over a war zone. Of course, we were nervous. After all, it's the president flying in a helicopter in stormy weather. Our helicopter came under fire. We had to go back to Makhachkala. And then our motorcade drove to Gudermes. I was in Gudermes. It was a secret, but somehow my father knew Putin was coming. No one believed him. Even I could not believe he was coming. War was raging, and here is Putin coming from Dagestan in a regular car. We arrived in Gudermes around 4:30 p.m. and welcomed in the new year together with our troops.
Happy New Year to you all. We wish you all the best in the coming year. We wish happiness and good health to you and your families. I want you to know that Russia very much appreciates what you're doing here. It's very, very important. It's not just about defending Russia's honor and dignity. It's much more serious. It's about putting an end to the breakup of Russia. That's what you're doing here.
When Putin sets a goal, he always expects results in due time. So when Putin said the problem had to be resolved in 2 weeks' time, 2 weeks later, it was actually resolved. After a lot of work with the local population, many people in Dagestan actually took up arms and joined the federal forces in fighting terrorists and defeated them. And the same thing happened later in Chechnya.
We should be very careful. Civilians should not suffer because of our actions. Apart from militants and bandits, there are women and children living in those areas. There are elderly people. There are war veterans. People we should be grateful to for defeating the Nazis. There are all these people there, and we should treat them as our people. Sorry, I can't shake everybody's hands.
Ahmad Haji Kadyrov believed in Putin and the work Putin was doing. He joined Putin, and then hundreds of thousands of Chechens followed him. We were surprised. Putin seemed to be different from all the other officials. I've known his father and mother. For Putin, World War II is not just a glorious chapter in Russia's history. It's also a personal tragedy that'll never fade. His brother is buried in a mass grave in St. Petersburg. He died when he was an infant. His father was heavily wounded while fighting on the Neva bridgehead and barely survived. When he came home from the hospital, he saw an ambulance coming to collect his wife's body. She was so starving they thought she was dead. But the president's father chased them away with his crutches and nursed her back to life. He moved to Moscow in 1998. His parents were already old by that time and required special care. So he would take every opportunity to go back to St. Petersburg, visit them, and provide whatever help they needed. All sorts of subjects come up when you spend some time together on a personal level. So one time we started talking about our childhood years and our mothers. And I told him it is such a pity that we neglect our mothers while they're still alive. We never find the time to visit them and spend time with them. And then he also started sharing his memories, and I could see he was very emotional.
The cold beauty of St. Petersburg was created by Russia's finest Tsar, Peter the Great, who built the city out of the sea and made it his capital. Since then, it's often represented what's best in the country and sometimes seen the worst. Amid the splendor, we found some of the hard realities of Russia today. Maria Semyonova is 80 and has to live in a communal flat with 31 other people.
We need honest people to be appointed to key positions. We just need honest people who will listen to our problems so we can live a better life. Putin is better. He is much better. What makes him better? Everything, really. He will sort things out, unless he is stopped in his tracks.
Maria plans to vote communist, but like many here, gives the unknown quantity Putin benefit of the doubt.
I would have never thought of running in my worst nightmare. I believe it is an absolutely shameless business. Candidates have to make promises, more promises than their rivals. But with the way my campaign was organized, I was able to avoid misleading a large number of people. And I'm happy about it. So tomorrow is going to be an ordinary day. For instance, we're having a meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister at 10 a.m.
Putin called me and offered me a job in the government. I honestly told him that I couldn't, that I was afraid I would fail. He said, "What do you mean you're afraid? I know it involves a lot of responsibility. I'm afraid myself. But someone has to do it. Since we got this opportunity, let's see if we can do something to make this country a better place." I guess the biggest question we were asking ourselves was, what are we going to do next? Nobody knew the answer to this question. Nobody knew what to do.
Очень часто от людей, от самых
Ordinary
простых людей
people
на площадях и
often
улицах
approach
наших
me on the
городов
street
слышал
and say
очень
some very
простые,
simple
но очень
yet
важные
very
для меня
important
слова.
things.
Мне говорили,
They
«Мы
say,
вам верим,
"We believe you.
мы
We're
надеемся на вас.
counting on you.
Вы нас только
Don't let
не
us down."
обманете». Могу
I can
заверить
assure
вас,
you
что в своих действиях буду
that I will
руководствоваться
be guided purely by
исключительно
Russia's interest in
государственными
my work.
интересами. Возможно, не удастся
There may be
избежать
mistakes,
ошибок. Но что я действительно могу обещать
but I
и
can promise
обещаю,
you, and I
это
do
то, что буду
promise you,
работать
that I will work
открыто
openly
и
and
честно.
honestly.
We started out by reviewing our situation in various areas: economic, financial, social, judicial, law enforcement. We would often come together in the evening, and I remember how in one of those meetings someone said, "Looks like we have Chechnya everywhere." What that meant, of course, was not the geographical Chechnya. It's just that all those areas were in complete disarray. People got so used to the government being weak back in the 90s that they expected the new government to be weak and controlled by oligarchs as well. When you became president, there was a powerful gang of oligarchs running the country. When they first saw you, they must have thought, "We can take him out in no time. We'll just pay him off." Those wolves controlled the government and the whole country for the best part of the 90s. And now you had to stop them from grabbing whatever they wanted.
You know, when I was still prime minister, after Yeltsin announced that I would run for president, some of them came to see me in my office. They sat across from me and said, "You do realize you'll never be the president here, don't you?" And I replied, "We'll see." That's the way they talked to me, right in the prime minister's office.
So, how did you manage to deal with them?
I used different methods with different people.
I remember well that meeting in the summer of 2000. It was essentially the first time President Putin met with a large group of business leaders. It was important for us to hear from Putin what kind of state he wanted to build. And it was important for him to explain to us what kind of behavior he expected from business people. He told us right away, it can't go on like this, and you can't pretend like you had nothing to do with all this.
I'd like to point out that to a large extent, it was you who created this situation through the political and quasi-political organizations you control. So, perhaps you should blame yourselves.
Putin wasn't aggressive at all. He was very calm. He said, "Things will be different now, and you are expected to do your part. Your business has to be transparent. You have to pay taxes. You have to pay decent wages to your employees. In other words, from now on, you'll have to earn the right to do business, especially considering the mess you got us in. A large part of Russia's economy was gray at the time, if not black. Salaries paid off the books, tax evasion, rampant crime. Many people no longer remember this, but back in 2000, the average pension was a little over 800 rubles. And even to get that pension or their salary, people had to wait for up to 6 months. Many, if not most, people in Russia were living hand to mouth. By the early 2000s, many strategic industries were no longer controlled by the government. In 2000, a very large number of people were either unemployed or employed in the gray economy. The country he inherited was like a sinking ship or an ice floe, gradually sinking into oblivion. The lives of 116 crew members are on the line. The forward section of the submarine is probably flooded, which complicates the rescue operation. We were waiting for Putin. I was sitting in the second row with the wives of the crew members. Frankly, I thought they would just rip him apart. One of them said, "How dare he show up here? Doesn't he understand what we're about to do to him?" They were still hoping that the Kursk could be rescued. But deep down, they probably knew there was no hope. They were full of anger, pain, and despair. I'd never seen anything like that. They bombarded him with questions.
The thing is, frankly speaking, I didn't know the situation was that bad. I mean, I knew the overall situation in the country was pretty bad, but I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't know our army and our navy were in such a poor condition. Equipment is all gone. None of it works.
A lady sitting next to me fainted 5 minutes into her speech. At first, people in the audience were yelling and interrupting him. They did not come to listen. They wanted him to listen to what they had to say. So at some point, he stopped and just listened to them. And then he went on and replied to them.
I'd go there myself if I could. I've been there, you know. But neither Russian nor foreign specialists can access Section 8. I don't want to give you a bunch of irresponsible promises and then take off. I am telling you the way things really are. This is the hard truth, but it's truth.
At some point, it hit me that he helped them to cross the line that separated the time when their husbands were alive from the time they were dead. They crossed this line together, and after that, they were able to move on. We designed a plan to put Russia back together. Because at that time, the country was literally falling apart. It was very common at the time to look down on the federal government. Back then, a governor could ignore a call from the president. The governor of Saka, for example, suggested leasing their natural resources to Japan. He said they will pay each of the local residents a certain amount, and everyone will be happy. With regions acting independently, passing and enforcing their own laws, Russia was looking less and less like a sovereign nation. At that time, it would be fair to say that our republic was not entirely and fully within the jurisdiction of the Russian Federation. And then Vladimir Putin said to me in a very low and calm voice, "Mr. Shaimiev, Tatarstan should be fully integrated into Russia's jurisdiction." I said, it would then be fair to have a special development program for Tatarstan once it's fully integrated into Russia's jurisdiction. And he said, that's the right way to do it. So, within the next few months, this process was completed. It was Putin's first winter as president. In the Far East, entire towns and cities with 200, 300, then 400,000 people were left without central heating. Even hospitals were closed because there was no heating. There was total chaos. The system of government had not yet been restored to its proper condition. Nothing was working. Miners were out on the streets, unemployed. Mines were shut down. At the same time, the ports of central Siberia had warehouses full of coal that had already been sold to overseas buyers and were just waiting to be shipped off. So the president made a decision to put an end to it and use that coal for domestic needs. The only way to fix that problem was for Putin to get personally involved in the situation. Planes were used to deliver cast iron radiators to the affected areas. It was absurd in terms of cost efficiency, but it made sense for people freezing out there. The mayors of 24 cities were fired. On the president's orders, they had to get out of their warm beds in the middle of the night, step outside in the freezing cold, and sign their resignation papers. Criminal investigations were initiated. Then those who kept their jobs woke up and started working. On that occasion, the president sent a strong message to everyone, showing that there was a government in the country and that the government was strong.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
When George W. Bush became president, he began pushing the human rights issue. Democracy, Chechnya, free media. There was a standard set of criticisms. So for about 6 months, there was this back and forth exchange with some pretty harsh statements being made. Washington would escalate, and Moscow would escalate in return. For a long time, Washington clearly was reluctant to treat Moscow as an equal. But now the situation has changed. Today, Presidents Putin and Bush shook hands for the first time in the castle of Bordeaux, 40 kilometers away from Slovenia's capital city, Ljubljana.
The president is listening very carefully, and he hears our arguments. Can Russia be trusted? I'm not going to answer that. I can ask you the same thing.
I'll answer the question. I looked the man in the eye. I found it to be very straightforward and trustworthy. We had a very good dialogue. I was able to get a sense of his soul. He's a man deeply committed to his country and the best interests of his country.
This was an unscripted, genuine remark by Bush based on his impression after meeting the Russian president, as evidenced by the fact that the two leaders met a total of 18 times over the next 7 years. The personal relationship between him and Putin was just great. They laughed a lot. They joked.
США в тот момент уже уверились, что Россия перешла в режим некой колониальной.
But the U.S. thought that Russia was a colonial democracy.
Прочно сели на иглу.
That it got hooked by the IMF.
Что экспертная.
And that we would just listen to international experts telling us how to develop our economy and what to do with our oil. On the outside, it looked very amiable. They would pat us on the back and say, "You're on the right track, guys. Good job."
We all had our illusions. Back then, it seemed to us that after the fall of the Soviet Union, after Russia voluntarily accepted the loss of territory and economic assets, and now that ideological confrontation between the Soviet Union and the rest of the civilized world was over, we thought it would be like in Pushkin's poem, then heavy chains fall by the board, then dungeons crack, and freedom's voices will greet you at the gate, rejoicing, and brothers hand to you a sword. But our brothers in other countries were in no hurry to give our sword back to us. In fact, they didn't mind stripping us of whatever military capabilities we still had left from the days of the Soviet Union.
You sound very disappointed.
Yes, I spent 20 years working in the KGB, in the intelligence service, and even to me, with all my background, it seemed that things would change dramatically now that this ideological barrier had been removed. And politics was no longer monopolized by the Communist Party, but they didn't. Things didn't change dramatically, and that's because, apart from ideology, there is such a thing as geopolitical interests. It's a simple truth, but somehow it wasn't immediately clear to us at the time. Our counterparts should realize that it is only natural for a country like Russia to have geopolitical interests, and thus we have to respect each other and come up with solutions that would be balanced and mutually acceptable.
But respect is based on power and being fair.
Exactly. There was a guy who said, "You can get much further with a kind word and a gun than you can with a kind word alone." And unfortunately, he was right.
You did have a kind word, but you didn't have a gun, yet. You had to restore the army, the economy, the defense industry.
Yes, of course, we had to start with the economy.
The debt was huge. We hit the bottom in January 2001. I remember how we got together after New Year's Day, and we discussed whether we have enough funds even to service the debt. The debt to GDP ratio was 140%. It doesn't get any worse than that. We'd have to spend 1/3 of our budget just to pay the interest. That's the kind of debt Putin had to deal with. It was clear that we were entering a new stage. But first, we didn't have new working mechanisms in place. And second, unfortunately, We didn't have enough people who could come up with solutions in such a situation. Putin had a good relationship with World Bank President Jim Wolfensohn. We talked to Wolfensohn, and he put together a team of the world's leading experts. So we had a series of meetings with these leading experts, and Putin used to attend those meetings, which lasted 3 to 4 hours each. He asked a lot of questions. He wanted to know about other countries' experiences and different options available to Russia. We didn't have a majority in parliament for the first 4 years, and so we had to work hard with different parties to get our initiatives approved. With Putin's support, we embarked on major reforms. We knew he'd back us up if necessary. We adopted a 10-year development plan. Something unprecedented in Russia's history. I remember 9/11 as if it were yesterday. My aide ran in shouting, "Turn on your TV!" So I turned it on, switched to CNN, and saw those horrible images. President Putin was the first one to call President Bush. It was a natural reaction for a president who'd had first-hand experience of dealing with international terrorism.
Russians know firsthand what terrorism is. So we can sympathize with the American people. I'd like to tell the people of the United States, on behalf of Russia, that we stand with you.
So I called the president, and he asked me if I had any ideas straight away. Straight away, I said, our strategic nuclear forces are supposed to have a military exercise on September 12th. So it's your call, but I think we should cancel it. So Putin said, yes, let's do that. Let's not disturb them at such a sensitive time. So we made this decision. In spite of the U.S. position on Chechnya, with the Americans describing terrorists fighting in Chechnya, including terrorists from other countries as freedom fighters, or at least rebels.
At one point, our security service got evidence of direct contacts between the militants fighting in the North Caucasus and the U.S. intelligence personnel in Azerbaijan. Those contacts even included assistance with transport. When I brought this up with the U.S. president, he said, "I'll have to kick some butt." But 10 days later, our security chiefs received a letter from their colleagues in Washington saying, "We maintain contacts with all opposition groups in Russia. We believe we have the right to do so, and will continue doing it in the future. It's totally unacceptable to use terrorists in order to achieve your short-term political or even geopolitical goals. If you support terrorists in one place, they will get stronger in another, and one day they will attack their former patrons."
You did warn Western leaders, didn't you? You asked them, why do you support terrorists? It will backfire.
Of course I did, but I guess somebody, especially Western intelligence services, thought their countries would benefit from whatever destabilizes their primary geopolitical opponent. And it is clear today that they've always considered Russia as such an opponent. But it turned out they were wrong. We continue to live by the old system of values. We talk about partnership. But in practice, we have not yet learned to trust each other. There is a great deal of sweet talk, but in secret, we continue opposing each other. We must strongly declare today that the Cold War is over. We must declare today that we give up our stereotypes and ambitions, and that from now on, we will jointly ensure security for the people of Europe and the whole world. We are often left out of the decision-making process, and then we are pressed to endorse decisions made without us. Once again, they start talking about being loyal to NATO. They even say these decisions can't be implemented without Russia. Let's ask ourselves, is this normal? Is this a real partnership?
Aber nach den Ereignissen in der USA brauche ich es nicht mehr zu beweisen.
After 9/11, the U.S. used the war on terror to justify many of its moves. Iraq is a vivid example of that.
Side by side, the Prime Minister and the Russian President seem relaxed enough at Vladimir Putin's country dacha. The weather may have been cold, but the welcome was warm.
I hope I have not frozen you to death.
It's a beautiful place. Thank you very much for inviting us.
But the two leaders' close relationship couldn't disguise differences over Iraq. Russia does not have in its possession any trustworthy data which would support the existence of nuclear or any other weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, he said. We have not received such information so far from our partners.
Well, there may be different perspectives on how sure we can be about Iraq and weapons of mass destruction. But there's one certain way to find out, and that is to let the inspectors back in to do their job.
As a permanent member of the UN Security Council, Russia's support is crucial if a new resolution on Iraq is to succeed. But progress is slow. Russia is determined to protect her economic interests in Iraq. The diplomats still have much work to do. Neil Connery, ITV News, Zavidovo.
Everyone realized that it was a critical point for Iraq and the region and international affairs in general.
This effort to hide things from the inspector.
The U.S. Secretary of State once again accused Baghdad of still having a whole arsenal of chemical and biological weapons and delivery systems. To emphasize the Iraqi threat, Colin Powell even brought physical evidence to the UN Security Council meeting hall.
Less than a teaspoonful of dry anthrax in an envelope shut down the United States Senate in the fall of 2001. This forced several...
It wasn't until recently that we've been shown evidence linking the Iraqi government to Al-Qaeda. This was when our U.S. friends made their presentation at a Security Council meeting. You know, I hadn't been in politics that long. Prior to that, I worked in intelligence, and I used to think that I was very smart and knew everything. But once I got involved in politics, I realized that we, intelligence people, are little children compared with politicians.
After Berlin, the president will fly to Paris. Experts say this is because Russia, Germany, and France share the same position on Iraq.
Together with France, Germany, and an overwhelming majority of nations, we believe that the Iraq issue can and should be resolved through diplomacy.
Eventually, the United States launched a military operation, even though the international community was very much against it. President Putin called me. Airstrikes had started. And we still had 3,500 Russian specialists in Iraq. And local authorities wouldn't let them leave. I contacted Saddam Hussein on behalf of the president and urged him to help. He agreed. And they even put together a schedule for evacuating Russian nationals. So none of them were hurt.
На тех встречах, которые проходили, они стали носить регулярный характер между
President Putin, President Chirac, and Chancellor Schroeder began to meet regularly to discuss global issues. It was obvious that the world was changing, and Europe had to be united in order to have a voice and a better position in this new world. That's why they made plans for Greater Europe, from Lisbon to Vladivostok, as a cooperation mechanism that would meet the needs of the 21st century. But after President Chirac and later Chancellor Schroeder stepped down, these plans were abandoned, which is very unfortunate because they had great potential. I don't know anybody who works as hard. He goes to bed very late. I often wonder if he sleeps at all, because I know he went to bed very late last night, and then he calls me very early the next morning. He can focus on one issue, and then quickly switch and focus on a different issue. Even now that he's president, he listens to people. He listens to everybody. He lets everybody speak. Perhaps sometimes he listens too much, because meetings go overtime, messing up his schedule. There's been a lot of talk about his tendency to arrive late. It's a real problem, particularly for reporters who cover Putin. Boy, have we suffered from it. But a couple of times I got a chance to see why he's late. For example, he meets with the media, and then I have some additional questions, and I ask him something while he's on his way out. So he says, "All right, Andre, let's talk about it after the meeting." And this way, I got to see what his actual life looks like. He's always on the phone. He's talking to me, and then Finance Minister Alexei Kudrin calls, and Putin gets distracted from talking to me and spends the next 20 minutes having a tense conversation with Kudrin. This means he'll be late for his next meeting. Kudrin thinks Russia should pay $11 billion to the Paris Club. And this is a tough decision to make. You may even say it's an historic decision. So I asked Putin, "What are you going to do?" And he says, "I guess we'll pay them." And then, in a week, boom, you hear it in the news. Russia has decided to pay its debt to the Paris Club.
Pretty heavy.
Putin shared my view that in order to feel more confident, Russia shouldn't have too much debt and shouldn't get deeper in debt, and Russia shouldn't depend on the IMF that much. He realized that Russia should be able to stand on its own 2 feet, because one day there might not be too many people willing to lend us money. Prior to 1998, Russia totally depended on imports. I remember how one time I was in a certain city, And there was a crowd of 2,000 people protesting because they needed insulin, and there was none available. When Putin became president, he gave me hope that doing business in Russia doesn't have to be limited to importing stuff and selling it with a markup. Somebody had to get involved in production. So, together with some friends, we made a decision. Let's build a pharmaceutical factory that'll meet European standards. We set the bar very high. And the president got personally involved in this project because we were under much pressure from international manufacturers and their lobby. People kept telling me, there's been 5 companies who tried to pull this off, and they all failed. What makes you think you'll be any different? I'm an ordinary person, but my story proves that as long as you've got an idea, you can make it work with a little help, like when Putin helped me. We created 300 jobs for young women who were previously unemployed. We knew that what we did was not just about making money. Today, there's enough insulin in Russia to ensure the country's pharmaceutical security. We actually started exporting to other countries. Soon, we'll be exporting insulin to Europe. We did it. What were the most tragic, the hardest moments for you?
Certainly, those horrible terrorist attacks, Beslan, Dubrovka Theater. If you're asking about tragic moments, I think those were the hardest things our people had to go through.
Nordost wasn't an ordinary terrorist attack. They seized the building, took hostages. I kept Putin updated basically around the clock, day and night. During those days, he didn't leave his office. Many people think that your primary goal is to kill the terrorists. No, your primary goal is to rescue the hostages. It was pretty late when they finally let me enter the building. They stopped my detail at the door. I went in all by myself. I had a meeting with Barayev, who was the leader of this group. He was the only one without a balaclava. The others had their balaclavas on and rifles in their hands. I said, let the women and the children go. The Quran doesn't say anything about fighting women and children. He said, unless you order your forces to pull out of Chechnya, I'll start executing hostages one by one, starting at 10 a.m. with a 30-minute interval. After that, I went to see the president. Of course, he was all wound up. You could see him gritting his teeth. He didn't tell me there would be an assault at 4 a.m. Careful! Stay away from the wires! It was tough. And there were many tough situations like that. Too many for such a short term. There has never been any other president anywhere in the world who's had to go through as many trials. And of course, you always carry the memory of each one of them as a heavy burden on your heart. That was the worst day of my life. I couldn't even imagine living without my father. After the assassination, Putin invited me to Moscow and met with me at his office.
President of the Chechen Republic, Akhmat Haji Kadyrov, served the Chechen people bravely and honorably. For years, he put his life on the line for the sake of Chechnya and the Chechen people. His leadership was very instrumental in restoring peace in the Republic. Ahmad Haji Kadyrov was killed on May 9th, the day our entire nation celebrates Victory Day. He was killed, but he was not defeated.
It is no secret that I fought against federal forces in the first campaign, and we all know how we took Grozny. Basically, they gave it to us on a plate. We all remember what kind of people were in the federal government at the time. That's why our people didn't trust the federal government. And most of our young people joined rebel groups hiding in the woods or in the mountains. Back in 1994, I was only 17. All the other guys were going to war, so I went with them. There were all sorts of people among us. There were Arabs from Jordan, mercenaries from Africa who fought for money. We weren't paid because we thought we were fighting for our land, for our freedom. Then, in 1999, the second campaign started. My name was on the blacklist, so I couldn't stay home. I had to go to the woods again. We had quite a number of young guys who were amnestied. Immediately after Ahmad Haji's assassination, there was a rumor that there would be a retaliation campaign. People throughout Chechnya were scared. So I went to see the president when I was in Moscow. I explained the situation to him, and I said, please give us a chance to bring those guys back. They're willing to fight for Russia, for our people. And I remember how difficult it was for the president to make this decision. But we got it going, and eventually we had over 7,000 people brought back under the amnesty. President Putin, we're on your side, and we're on the side of the people. Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! This means we were able to save 7,000 lives, actually more like 70,000 lives. Today, the Chechen Republic lives in peace and prosperity. The way people live, the way they think, has changed dramatically. What I'm about to say may surprise you, but Russian Orthodox believers, Muslims, Jews, and Buddhists, traditional religions which have always existed in Russia, belong to the same civilization. And one of the special things about this civilization is that people treat the followers of other religious traditions as their family. So the president, being an Orthodox believer, one who goes to an Orthodox church, treats the followers of other religions as brothers. He regularly sends holiday greetings to them and helps them with whatever requests they may have. I remember when we celebrated the millennium anniversary of Kazan, there was a gala at our biggest theater, and when President Putin came on stage to give his speech, he suddenly started speaking in the Tatar language. You should have seen the audience. They went wild. They were ecstatic, applauding him. They were so loud he couldn't go on. He said, wait, there's more.
Wait, there's more I can say.
So he went on speaking Tatar, and the audience applauded even more loudly.
And now, for the sake of those who have only recently started taking Tatar classes and thus didn't get it, there's one sentence I'd like to repeat in Russian. Kazan played a pivotal role in the formation of the Russian nation, in solidifying Russia as one nation.
It's not that easy, you know, to win an audience for any leader. And for a head of state to be able to do this, it's a real gift. I can't single out anything in particular. The most important thing is, he came and took charge of the country.
Я помню регионы, которые сегодня считаются, ну, может быть, не передовыми, но...
Take places like Kursk,
там та же самая Курская,
or Tambov, or Voronezh, for example. They were all extremely poor. Big cities were doing okay, more or less. But in those other places, there was no civilization back in 2000. Wherever you go, roads are in terrible condition. Potholes, puddles, litter everywhere. And look at those places today. Living standards there are actually pretty good. And people living in those rural districts, those farmers, they produce enough food for Moscow and pretty much the rest of the country. After college, I really wanted to work at a farm, to apply all the things I'd learned. And when I first came here and saw it all, I was so excited. We take very good care of our cows. In a place like this, they can have a very long and happy life and provide us with milk. I came here 2 years ago, and now I have a place of my own. I have a well-paid job. If every person does his or her job properly, the country as a whole will grow. So it's all in our hands. This is a very important matter. Our country's food security depends on this.
I can tell you frankly that developed countries seek to squeeze Russia out, whenever possible, from promising markets. Their obvious economic advantages cater to their geopolitical ambitions. We have to focus all our activities on one goal: to secure a place for Russia among the world's most powerful, advanced, and influential nations. Within the next decade, we should at least double Russia's GDP.
Many people doubted that it was possible. Some even laughed, saying it should be easy to double GDP when it's close to zero. The first thing we did was sort out the situation with the mining tax, introducing clear and transparent rules. The government started getting revenue from oil and natural gas. Prior to that, revenues were significantly smaller. It was neither transparent nor fair. And it was at that time, in 2003, that the Yukos situation came up. Khodorkovsky was one of us. I can't even explain how it all happened. I just feel sorry for him, because he spent the 10 best years of his life where he did. It's like kids, when you tell them they can't do certain things, and they like to push boundaries, see if they can get away with it.
Не только ЮКОС шел путем уменьшения налогов, ухода от налогов.
Yukos was not the only company dodging taxes.
И после того, как
other companies were doing the same.
Многие компании тоже.
And based on court decisions,
средства в бюджет по результатам
they also had to pay further taxes to the budget. Your friends say the biggest problem with you is you went to law school. You respect the law. You always abide by the law. It's impossible to make you break it.
That's true. I had very good professors, and I'm very grateful to them. They ingrained some ideas in us. Some fundamental things, not just the things you're supposed to know, but some basic principles that should guide your life. I don't remember if I told this story before, but when I started working for the KGB, there was one time when we were planning an operation. I don't even remember. Something minor. And one of the more experienced operatives suggested doing it in a certain way. There were quite a few people in the room. And I told them, you know, I don't think that's legal. So this guy, he was clearly puzzled. He looked at me and said, "What do you mean it's not legal?" There is a KGB order, and he gave me the number of the order that allows it. So I said, well, if there is such an order, it should be reversed because it's unconstitutional. It's not a joke, and I didn't make it up. This really happened. I was very young. I had just graduated, and they all just laughed at me. Thankfully, it was 1976, and the situation was very different from the days of Stalin.
Butovo is sometimes called the Russian Golgotha. This is where people were executed without trial. A mass grave is more than a kilometer long, with bodies piled up on top of each other. Most of the executed were ordinary people, arrested for being late for work, accidentally damaging factory property, or failing to meet their output rate.
Меня потрясла история с Бутовским полигоном. Я тогда прошел по всему...
I was shocked when we went to Butovo. I was walking next to Putin, and I knew how he felt.
И я слышал, как он говорил...
And I heard him mutter,
Творили.
God, what have they done?
Я даже, честно
To tell you the truth,
до сих пор не обо всем из того, что он тогда сказал, написал.
I didn't even report all the things he said that day because I thought it was too personal. He saw the lists of the victims and the headstones and, most importantly, he walked on the grounds where they were buried. You can say the ground was truly burning under his feet. When I met President Putin, I realized that he can look very dispassionate and cold-blooded. But in reality, he's got a big, warm heart. He's not shrewd or crafty. What I mean is, he's not the kind of person who would do something unprincipled in order to get rich or gain some benefit. His coach, Anatoly Rokhlin, was a wonderful person. Of course, when he taught Putin judo, he didn't know his student would become president. He just wanted to shape him as a man who would stand firm on his own 2 feet. I think there are 2 elements that shape every person. First, there's who you are, your personality, your emotions, your intellect. And then there's what you are, the position you occupy. And these 2 forces always clash. If the latter element is stronger, it can change the way you behave dramatically. But if your personality is stronger than the chair you sit in, or the money you handle, then you will remain yourself. I think that Putin has such a strong personality that he went through different stages in his career, and they had little or no impact on him. I remember how one time, in August, he invited us to his residence. We sat down in a little gazebo and he presented his idea of national projects to us. The idea was to have special projects for education, healthcare, agriculture, and housing. When new perinatal centers opened throughout Russia, including our center in Yaroslavl, the birth rate went up significantly.
This is Andre and Alexander. It's my second time giving birth. My eldest is a girl. She's 3. Look, he's smiling. Quick, take a picture.
With every year, the number of births in the perinatal center grows. This year, we had exactly 500 more births than last year. Take the Maternity Capital Program. It's not just promoting family values. It's not just saying that it's good to have a big family. It's a real government program stimulating childbirth. It's a policy based on values, and this is very important. You know, presidents have to deal with all sorts of issues: economics, politics, healthcare, education, infrastructure, oil and gas, international relations, what have you. And nobody teaches you all these things before you become president. Putin has this unique ability to get the hang of things. He uses this expression sometimes. He says, "Let me immerse myself in this, and then we'll talk." He likes to learn, so he's always learning something new. Somehow, he learned English, and before we knew it, boom, Putin speaks English.
Are you ready to come out in English?
My English is very bad.
Please remember that he hasn't had any days off or holidays for a long time now. The only time he has to do it is from like 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. or from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. He just doesn't have any other time, and he still does it. He didn't know how to skate. Now he plays ice hockey. He doesn't yell. He keeps his temper to himself. And when Putin first started to ski, it was a very intense exercise for him. You could see him on a mountain slope, going up and down for hours. He would come for 2.5 to 3 hours, and during that time, he wouldn't stop for a cup of tea or a chat, just up and down, up and down. I don't know when and how he learned to play the piano. I only know he did it consistently. First, we all saw him play with one finger, with one hand. A few days later, he started playing with both hands.
Come climb the hill with me, baby. We'll see what we shall see. I'll bring my boat with me. I'll be with you when waves are blue. Each afternoon we'll go higher than the moon will go. Spend the rain and June will go.
He comes from an ordinary working family, just like millions of others, millions of Russians, just like you and me.
I need your help.
I'm listening.
My son got arrested. Please help. Do something about it.
He spent his early years in a communal flat, and it really had a big influence on him.
We have huge cracks in our walls, and the pipes burst in the winter.
Ironically, 80% of the population understand him better than the 20% that's made up of bureaucrats and intellectuals. I think he feels that his main role is to protect the ordinary people. People always give him some kind of notes and papers with something scribbled on it in pencil. He takes them, or gives them to his aides when his hands are full. And the worst thing that can happen to his aides is when 2 hours later he says, "So where are those papers?" They say, "What papers?" "You know, we stopped in the middle of the street and there was this old lady who gave me those papers." Sometimes he calls me and says, "You know, I was in a certain city and there was a woman or a family that approached me. And I had this official with me." So he has all the details. Could you please call him and take care of this situation?
Winter is here.
Yes, welcome.
I came with the governor to take a look at your hospitals and social services.
You are clearly interested in what people have to say. You look at the people when they talk to you. You're listening. Why is that? Is it because you need an alternative source of information? Do you use them as a tuning fork?
No, I don't need alternative sources of information or tuning forks. I've got everything I need. I don't really know why I do that. It's hard to explain. And I'm not saying this to impress you, but I really feel like I'm part of this country, these people. Of course, it's important for me that when I meet with the people, they can tell me about their complaints or concerns directly. It is important to have this kind of feedback. But with some people, all those complaints would fall on deaf ears. Thankfully, I'm different. I still hear them. This is because I've never been part of the so-called elite, which is very fortunate. Of course, when people are born and raised on a different plane, that's not a bad thing either. There are advantages to being born and brought up in an elite environment. I've been observing such people, and I respect them. I even envy them a little, because from the very beginning, they learn a lot of important and useful things that help them achieve great things in various areas. But for someone who does what I do today, it's extremely important to be able to relate to ordinary people. It's very important, and it helps a lot in my job.
My mom always told me to stay away from people who dream of power and stick with those for whom power is a burden. I came to the president and I said, "We need to bring Ivan Ilyan's body back to Russia." Ivan Ilyin was an outstanding Russian philosopher who spent his entire life trying to understand and explain to others what was going on in Russia and why. He died in Switzerland. The lease on the plot where he was buried was about to expire. According to Swiss laws, if there are no relatives and no one takes care of the grave, the plot may be used to bury someone else. When the president heard about it, he took it very personally. It was decided to rebury Ilyin at the Donskoy Monastery. Brothers and sisters, today we take part in an historic event. The famous sons of Russia, General Anton Denikin, philosopher Ivan Ilyin, together with their spouses, return to rest in their native land. It's not just about burying the remains of two great people in our land. I hope it will be the beginning of the end of the horrible civil war. The reburial of Ilyin Denikin, and earlier Ivan Shmylyov, our brilliant author, are all steps on the way to consolidation, intended to stop civil war in people's minds.
К собиранию той духовной силы, которую несли в себе эти потрясающие русские.
We gather together the spiritual power of these amazing people who devoted their lives to Russia.
Если ты
You have to inspire the whole country with this.
эту атмосферу сделать общей, только в этом случае.
And only then will 80% of the people support you.
Причем людей, которые не просто живут и нелегко.
And these are people who have their problems, who are not always happy with the local authorities or the central government. But when they see that they have a leader to whom power is a burden, a cross he bears, he consolidates the nation. To him, national interest is his personal interest. When people see that there is a person who assumes responsibility for all of them, for the entire country, in spite of all their difficulties, they say, it's okay, we still support you. At this point, Russia had not yet had any big achievements or large-scale projects that would show the whole world that we are not just a fragment of a great empire, but a great country with its own achievements and ambitions. So, in 2005, we submitted our bid to host the Winter Olympics. To be honest, I didn't expect us to win the right to host the Olympics. Before the IOC session in Guatemala, we got together to decide whether Putin should go or not, because if he goes and we lose, it won't look so good. So I told him, Mr. President, if you don't go, I can guarantee we are going to lose. We can still lose even if you go, but if you stay here, there's no chance we can win. When the president arrived in Guatemala, he spent the next 2 days meeting with key IOC members nonstop. He had 30 to 40 meetings within 48 hours. We had a rehearsal, and he came and did his part. He was very disciplined, but the most important thing was for us to know exactly how long he would be speaking. So he takes out his notes and asks me, "Are you ready?" I say, "Yes." He says, "Okay, go." I started the stopwatch, and nothing happened. He just read his speech silently and said, "Stop," and I stopped the stopwatch.
Mr. President, esteemed members of the International Olympic Committee, ladies and gentlemen, I appeal to you to give your support to the Olympic dream of the millions of Russian citizens who await your decision with the hopes in their hearts. Thank you.
It was a bombshell. It was very important for us to show the IOC that we respect them. We had to do something to make them see that we really respect them. And when Putin said those two sentences in French, it clicked, and right away we knew, that's it, we've got the Olympics. I guess the country is his #1 priority. Followed by his family and his friends. He's always loyal to his friends. When people betray him, he takes it very hard. I knew some people who used to be his good friends. But after they did something contradicting his principles, he'd just cut them off and never see them again.
личное общение.
Personal relationships are called personal for a reason. But I guess there are a few things.
Когда-то давно был
For example,
записан
there's a CD that came out in 1999, I think.
диск, называется «Песни страны».
The name is Songs of a Country Which Is Gone, or something like that.
Исполнители, и там и слова, там.
Anyway, it's quite good. Very good songs, very good singers, nice tunes, nice lyrics. So sometimes we sing along. There's a saying that it's up to us to choose our enemies and our friends, but neighbors are given by God. So God made us neighbors. I believe nobody can be as close as Russia and Kazakhstan. This is a fact. I don't mean to offend anyone, but we are as close as it gets. We're now building this Eurasian Economic Union. It was my idea. Some people say Russia wants to rebuild the Soviet Union, but it was actually my idea. So it's okay for them to have a European Union? But we can't have a Eurasian Union? Well, they're always like that.
Отчаянные попытки некоторых стран все-таки сохранить, наверное, свою роль.
Certain countries are desperate to hold on to their role as the one and only center of power in the world.
Они привели к тому, что стало размываться.
This erodes the system of international law and global security and European security.
Европейской безопасности.
This erodes the Yalta system.
Of course, there have been periods in history when the world was unipolar. There have been times when a nation would seek global domination. There have been all sorts of things in history. But what does it mean for the world to be unipolar? No matter how you embellish the term, at the end of the day, it means that there is only one center of power, only one center of decision-making. It is a world where there is one master, one sovereign.
I was surprised by the reaction of German and other foreign journalists. They forgot they are journalists. They stopped taking notes. They were just sitting there, looking at him and listening to him, with their mouths open.
Unilateral and often illegitimate actions haven't resolved any problems. On the contrary, they resulted in new tragedies and created new centers of tension.
On the one hand, people were shocked. On the other hand, some were not too happy. I had people come to me and say, "Was it really necessary to speak so bluntly?" I said, "What is so blunt about it?"
Speaking of issues going back many years, as an old Cold Warrior, one of yesterday's speeches almost filled me with nostalgia for a less complex time. Almost. Many of you have backgrounds in diplomacy or politics. I have, like your second speaker yesterday, a starkly different background, a career in the spy business. And I guess old spies have a habit of blunt speaking.
Okay, I'll just answer the questions I wrote down. And if I miss something, you can remind me later. What's going to happen to Kosovo and Serbia? Only Kosovars and Serbs know that. Let's not decide for them how they should live. Let's not play God and try to solve all the problems for everybody. We can only create conditions that might help them solve their problems.
I first met Putin when we worked together in a very small unit of a very big organization. This big organization was naturally the KGB, and this small unit was foreign intelligence, which was really a very small unit. We both were young junior officers, lieutenants or captains, and we had illegals in our unit. People who came back after working in the West for 20 years.
Мы иногда их вспоминаем с Владимиром Ильичем.
Sometimes, when we have time to reminisce, we talk about them.
Служили.
Those people didn't serve for money. And they put a lot on the line. If something happens, they are illegals. So they were role models to us. They served their country, their motherland. That's the essence of their work, if you forget about politics and ideology. After he ended his career in the KGB, in foreign intelligence, it was by working with Anatoly Sobchak that he began to learn about democracy, about this new life with new rules and opportunities. Sobchak was a very prominent figure. He helped Putin grasp what was going on with the country. See, we were all raised in a system where the government controlled everything, and we didn't know any other way. Sobchak taught us to be balanced. He showed us new opportunities of democracy, freedom of expression, freedom of discussion, argument, political competition. In 2008, after 2 terms, Putin's approval rating was extremely high. The biggest question was whether Putin would stay for a 3rd term or would leave office, according to the Constitution, and give room to another leader. Even though the country was still weak in some respects. This was the only question people talked about.
Mr. President, a number of people encouraged you to stay for a 3rd term over the past couple of years, including perhaps some who are close to you. Did you think about yielding to them and staying for a 3rd term? How hard was it for you to fight this temptation?
I've never, ever had the temptation to stay for a 3rd term. From my very first day as president of the Russian Federation, I've decided that I would never violate the Constitution. I was inoculated against it when I worked with Anatoly Sobchak. In fact, I think this sends an important signal to everybody, showing that we all, including the president, must abide by the law.
What was your greatest achievement as president? And what was your greatest failure?
I don't think there were any serious failures. We've achieved the goals we set for ourselves and completed all the tasks. I can tell the people who elected me twice that I have nothing to be ashamed of. For 8 years, I worked day and night like a galley slave. I'm happy with my work.
Hundreds of thousands of tourists and 40 world leaders have come to St. Petersburg for its 300th anniversary. War veteran Mairbek Zagoev is one of the first patients at this brand new hospital with its unique medical equipment. A new ice-breaking tanker was launched today. The minarets can be seen from any part of Grozny, even at night. The heart of Chechnya may be the biggest mosque in Europe. The North Pole is ours! We did it, guys! Hello, Russia. Hello, Moscow. We can continue developing the way we have been doing in recent years. This is the path we should choose, and there is a good chance this is what is going to happen.
Are you cold?
No!
Can you give me a minute?
Yes!
The election of the President of the Russian Federation has been declared valid.
In 2008, when Putin became prime minister.
Ведь казалось, что это будет такое, знаете...
We all expected that this would be a time for him to rest on his laurels. After all, as president, he saved the country from falling apart, secured stable economic growth, paid Russia's external and domestic debts, improved the living standards, and not just for future generations, but for the people living today, something which had never happened in Russia's history. So it seemed that he would now enter this beautiful white government building on the bank of the Moscow River, walk into his nice office, sit back and relax, and then the global crisis broke out. Oil dropped to $45. Everyone was scared. Nobody has ever experienced anything like that on a global scale. Again, what did Putin do? He said, I assume responsibility. I promise 1998 won't happen again. I will be personally responsible for that. Then he rolled up his sleeves and continued working as a galley slave, day and night. The future of tens of thousands of people was at stake. Without government support, they'd be out on the street, unemployed.
How many people used to work here?
3,000 before the crisis. Now it's 2,345.
That's those on the payroll?
Right. 2/3 are on furlough. There were 3 companies operating on one site. At a certain point, we got so confused that we weren't able to come up with a solution that would keep the factory running.
I don't see your signature here. Come here. Sign it. Come here. That's the contract. Can I have my pen back?
Считаю, что вы сделали заложниками своих амбиций.
Thousands of people suffered because of your incompetence, arrogance, or perhaps even primitive greed. This is totally unacceptable. What happened to this corporate social responsibility you talk about so much?
No, there was no bitterness. It's just that sometimes discussions take a long time. Sometimes you're stuck in a stalemate. And Putin knows that the ultimate responsibility lies with him, so he has to make a call, or at least give a push to others, so they stop discussing and finally do something.
On
the government side, nobody can convince me that the regional authorities and officials at other levels did all they could to help the people. What did you say when I told you I was coming? You said, don't go to Pikalova, let's visit another place where they just built a new factory. Well, it's good that you have a new factory, but what about this place? Why was it only after they knew I was coming that everybody here scurried like a bunch of roaches? Why is it that nobody could take care of this situation earlier? Back wages must be paid today. That's 41,242,000 rubles. Good luck.
When the crisis hit and layoffs began, the company launched this huge Mill 5000 project. It saved people from losing their jobs. The pipes we manufacture are used for complex pipelines like Nord Stream or the power of Siberia and for submarines. Of course, it affects our paychecks. We have a much better life now. We see real changes here. And in Russia, you know, people pay attention to actions, not words. August 8th, 2008, as you recall, was the opening day for the Beijing Olympics. We were in the same room, I was talking to Putin when the phone rang. I said, I should probably go. He said, no, it's okay. That's when they told him about Ossetia. When he put the phone down, he looked extremely upset. I asked what had happened. At first, I thought it was something with his family. I never saw him like that before. He said, can you imagine? They attacked our peacekeepers and killed them. What are they doing? What are they doing? The situation had been dramatic for 17 years. And for 17 years, Russia had been performing peacekeeping functions, helping to maintain peace and stability, preventing the killings that had been taking place there since the 90s, and trying to preserve Georgia's territorial integrity. But after the aggression and genocide started by the Saakashvili regime, things changed. Our main priority was to prevent a humanitarian disaster and save the lives of the people that we were responsible for. He decided to fly to Ossetia from Beijing right away. Of course, he went straight to the people. That's typical of him. He went over military reports while on the plane. So the first thing he did upon arrival was to go to the people in refugee camps and hospitals. It's genocide. They are killing the
My baby is only 5 months old, and he'll never see his father. I don't know.
His personal photographer and cameraman were with him.
I don't know what happened to my father-in-law. He was left in the village. He's an old man and he's ill.
So we turned to them and told them pretty harshly to stop filming. Because these women were so stricken by grief. And it was pitch black outside. So the cameraman just used his camera light as a flashlight to guide the way. Your presidency is like one endless test. You deal with one problem and another one comes along. The Chechen War, terror attacks, the economic crisis, Ossetia. It goes on and on. Just when it seems that the hard part is over, something else comes up. As a leader, do you feel more at ease when it's war? Or when you have to do your hard, routine job at the time of peace?
I worked as prime minister, and I liked that job very much. It's more specific. You can focus on specific issues. And you can see results right away. You can see if you were right or wrong. Whereas when you deal with bigger, global issues, the result isn't clear right away. You don't know how things are going to turn out later on. Actually, I've never thought about it. I just do the job I have to do and deal with the problems I'm facing.
In early 2009, I was at a meeting in Sochi where we discussed the future of Olympic venues. Putin kept urging everyone to spend the budget money sparingly. He said that, on the one hand, venues should be nice, but it was a time of crisis, and we had to save as much as we could. So at one point, when he was talking about this once again, he said, after all, it's the people's money. He said it quietly. He wasn't trying to impress us. But his voice caught a little, and it was clear that he feels personally responsible. He really thinks that it's the people's money, so it needs to be spent with care. At that time, he visited an unprecedented number of factories and plants. Rostomach, Avtovaz. And it was summer when forest fires raged across the country. Every other day, we traveled to these burning villages and met with people who lived there. Sometimes it seemed like they were ready to tear apart any government official that appeared before them.
Help us, Mr. Putin, help us. Please, help us. Why hasn't anyone done anything? Why did you refuse to do anything?
Well, we saved you.
You saved us? You saved us?
We won't fix the burned ruins. We'll build new houses.
Let Putin tell us.
Let me finish. Just a moment. Secondly, I want everyone to hear what I'm about to say. Can everyone hear me? By wintertime, the new houses will be ready.
Do you promise that our village will be rebuilt?
Yes, I promise. Your village will be rebuilt.
These trips, full of smoke and fire, are the first thing that comes to mind about his time as Prime Minister.
The things we saw yesterday, the things our children saw.
That was the time when things got really tough. It was hard work, day in and day out. I remember the time we went to see those same villages after new houses had been built.
I invited you to come for a housewarming party, and here you are. Please, come in. It's warm, even though we put it at the minimum level.
The governor said that they wouldn't be able to finish the heating system in time.
But they did.
С учетом предложения возглавить список партии,
considering the offer to become the leader of the party and engage in party work, and my willingness to engage in practical work in the government if the elections go well, I think the Congress should nominate Vladimir Putin for president. When Medvedev nominated Putin, and vice versa, it seemed very arrogant to voters. It seemed like there wasn't a real election. So those who didn't vote for Putin came to Bolotnaya Square to demonstrate their disagreement. I went to Bolotnaya Square to take a look. They had a platform, and they were very particular about who was allowed to speak from that platform. I was sitting in a nearby bar, listening to their hilarious conversations, how they are about to sweep away the government, how they have already won by coming out to protest. Even back then, I realized how ridiculous they were. I did talk to Putin about it. I told them that I'd probably join the rally at Sakharov Prospect. I won't tell you what he said, but at least he didn't tell me not to go. I just thought that was the first time that the middle class came out to protest. We need to organize a platform for dialogue. Otherwise, we'll end up with revolution and miss the opportunity we have today. I tried to persuade the government and Putin personally to start a dialogue with the people who were genuinely concerned about the situation in the country. But those people got involved with radicals and nationalists.
Поэтому я уже позже увидел, что Путин не хочет
And eventually, I realized that Putin didn't see anybody he could talk to. In Putin's opinion, they crossed the red line. When they attacked police. So a decision was made to launch an investigation, and if there was evidence showing that a suspect had hit a police officer, they would go to prison. And that's what happened. It was in accordance with Russian law, and more importantly, Putin's idea of justice.
They were trying to get ahead of me, flying next to me, on the left and on the right. It was great.
Ваш последовательный оппонент Ксения Собчак так-то вообще, значит, проецировала всю эту ситуацию на электоральную...
I don't know if you're aware of that, but one of your opponents used those cranes as a metaphor for voters. She wrote that 63% of cranes followed Putin while others headed south, and a small group of cranes stayed and built their nests on city squares and boulevards. So not all of the cranes followed Putin.
That's true. Not all the cranes followed right away. Weaker ones stayed behind. But that was the first time. The second time, they all followed. I have to say that their leader, the pilot, is in part responsible for that. There are situations when, due to weather conditions and strong side wind, the pilot has to accelerate and climb quickly. Otherwise, the whole system may tip over. So, not all cranes can keep up. What else? Certainly, there are specimens that do not fly in flocks at all. They prefer to nest on their own. That's a separate issue. Still, even if they are not part of the flock, they are part of the population, and we have to treat them with care.
There were people like Khodorkovsky and Berezovsky who adopted an uncompromising, aggressive stance towards him. Mr. President, you pardoned Mikhail Khodorkovsky a year ago, and he promised you not to get involved in politics anymore. Yet now he says he may even run for president. Do you ever regret letting him go?
Where is he going to run for president? Mr. Khodorkovsky appealed to me for pardon. At least, he sent me the paperwork, and he did say he would not engage in politics. But that's not why I pardoned him. It's up to him to decide whether he wants to be a politician. I made my decision based on humanitarian considerations. In his appeal, he wrote that his mother was seriously ill. You know, mothers are the top priority. I really mean it. Also, by that time he had served most of his prison time. So it made no sense to just keep him there, if this meant he could not have a chance to say goodbye to his mother.
Of course, his mother played an important role. Because humanity is important. Berezovsky wanted to return to Russia, and he spoke about his love for Russia and things like that.
Yes, he writes that he made a lot of mistakes and did a lot of harm, and asks for forgiveness and an opportunity to come back home.
And he was ready to allow him to return to Russia. He is strong enough to forgive even his staunchest opponents.
Who flew across the Atlantic last night, a man on a mission, on a diplomatic offensive, but somehow sounding defensive.
And I also look forward to having an extensive conversation about the situation in Syria. I think our joint recognition that the use of chemical weapons in Syria is not only a tragedy, but also a violation of international law that must be addressed.
From Stockholm, he'll head to St. Petersburg for the G20 summit. But a one-to-one with Vladimir Putin is not on his schedule.
Are we ready?
Earlier they were ready, but on Syria perhaps only for disagreement. If Mr. Obama cannot convince world leaders that a military response is the right one, convincing Congress and the American people at home will be even harder before his own key vote next week.
A decision to bomb Damascus was expected in a matter of days. The real purpose was to bring down the regime, supposedly because the Syrian government had used chemical weapons, even though there was no evidence to support that claim. So at the G20 summit in St. Petersburg, Putin said, okay, if you're so worried about chemical weapons, let's have Syria join the Chemical Weapons Convention and make a commitment to destroy its arsenals. If it's only the chemical weapons you're worried about, and nothing else, there's no need to bomb the country, and Russia is ready to use its influence to have Syria join the Chemical Weapons Convention and sign an agreement with the OPCW on the destruction of chemical munitions.
I'd like to remind you that the use of force against a sovereign state is only permissible for the purposes of self-defense. And we all know that Syria has never attacked the United States. Another possibility is when such a decision is made by the UN Security Council. To quote one of the participants of our discussion yesterday, those who act differently put themselves above the law.
At the beginning, there was no dialogue. There was a handshake at the welcoming ceremony. Some called it cold, others called it timid, yet others described it as aggressive. Next morning, quite unexpectedly, they met. Everybody present at the G20 meeting witnessed Putin and Obama talking. They started talking standing and then took a seat in the corner to continue. And that went on first for a few minutes, with all the heads of states waiting for them standing. Then for 5 more minutes, and 10 more minutes. They were so absorbed in their conversation that they didn't notice what was going on around them. In terms of the protocol, it was a bit awkward, yes. But that awkwardness did not grow because all the leaders were understandingly looking at that corner where the two presidents sat talking. And it was absolutely clear they all realized how important that conversation was for the entire world. Of course, Putin and Obama didn't resolve the Syrian conflict. But at least chemical weapons were successfully disposed of. Who knows what might have happened if those chemical weapons fell into the hands of Islamic State? The guys who cut people's heads off, burn people, and so on. What he suggests to his partners is to look ahead and do something that is not just a short-term deal. Because you have an election coming up in 2 or 3 years. And you need to impress your voters. He looks beyond that, over the horizon. And that's what makes Putin very different from his Western counterparts. And so you're offering the world this new, fair world order. And then you see that the world actually doesn't want to listen. They claim that black is white and white is black. Is it because they are afraid of the role Russia began to play in the world? When Russia evolved from basically a non-existing state into a powerful political player? And when you became a leader in the eyes of the conservative circles of both American and European society?
Well, I think you're stretching it a bit here. You know, I sometimes think they like us when we need humanitarian aid. That's when they're comfortable with us, and they help us out with their potatoes. And by the way, we are grateful for all the help, because they sincerely mean it, especially ordinary people. But the so-called ruling elite, political and financial circles, find us more to their liking when we're poor and when we have to beg for help. However, as soon as we start talking about our interests, they start sensing some geopolitical rivalry, and that's understandable. If you, for example, got a new, young, strong, well-bred, and exceptionally well-educated colleague at your work who'd start pushing you off your turf a little, you'd put up a fight too. And it's only natural. It's the law of nature, and it works the same way in international affairs. I'm deeply convinced we're not breaking any rules here. And when I say rules, I mean public international law, the UN Charter and all that. This stands true for our relations with Ukraine, the situation with Crimea, other parts of the world, our position on international terrorists. This is also true in regard to our global security concerns. For example, the decision by the United States to withdraw from the crucial anti-ballistic missile treaty. When we start talking about all these things, when we, for instance, bring up the subject of NATO expansion, which brings military infrastructure closer to our borders, that's when they feel compelled to act against us. And that's how the situation got to the point where they imposed sanctions on Russia. This is just an attempt to contain. And there were many examples of that in Russia's history, even in the days of the Russian Empire. For centuries, attempts were made to contain Russia. It's nothing new, and we definitely shouldn't panic over it.
As the flag was being raised, I sang the anthem very loudly. You could even say I was shouting. That's because I won under the Russian flag, and I wanted to sing and shout at the top of my voice.
When the Olympics started and the situation in Kiev escalated, this anti-Putin propaganda, or rather hysteria, began in Kiev. They were saying it was Putin killing protesters, Putin killing their children, and then it started getting bigger. It was no longer just the personal opinion of some people. It was the official position of the state. And with the way Western leaders behaved, I saw this expression on Putin's face. And then I knew that this was the beginning of a new era. He didn't say anything this time. He didn't put his glass down like he did in Dagestan. But you could see it on his face that Russia was not shown the respect it deserved. Russia was being ignored and humiliated. That's how you become aware of the country you live in. its role, its history, its mission, if you will. That's when you realize history is being made.
The main thing for us was to understand what people in Crimea want. What do they want? Do they want to stay in Ukraine, or do they want to be with Russia? If the people want to return to Russia and do not want to live under neo-Nazis and radical nationalists, we can't abandon them. We just can't. That's what I explained back then to my partners. I explained to them that people are our top priority. And I said, I don't know whose interests you're going to protect, but we'll go all the way protecting ours. It's not that we want to grab some land. And it's not just that Crimea is of strategic importance in the Black Sea area. It's a matter of historical justice. I believe we did the right thing, and I have no regrets.
We arrived in Crimea on the referendum day. It was an incredible feeling. We saw families with children going to vote with flags, Russian flags, and balloons. And they were so happy. I saw grown men cry in the main square in Simferopol. They were completely sober, and they were crying. They were happy that they finally came back home. So we gave a performance, and there was a song that said all the land between Volga and Yenisei was Russian. So spontaneously, I changed it to say from Crimea to Yenisei. People were ecstatic, all the people I saw there.
Crimea and Sevastopol's long, trial-filled, grueling journey is over. They are back to their native shore, their port of origin, their home, Russia.
Russia! Russia! Russia!
He's great. He is unpretentious and friendly. I'm sure he can be hard when necessary, but I guess when you are president of such a big, vast, strong country, you have to be just like your country, big and strong.
How many pull-ups can you do?
50.
No way. Way to go.
The generation that has grown up with Putin in office are the driving force of our nation, who will be running the country in the next 50 years. They are a generation that has gradually ceased to shy away from the word patriotism. They are the first generation to wear clothes sporting the Russian flag and feel proud of it. They are a generation who know that in this or that area, Russia is the best in the world. Where were we 15 years ago? A society ridden with disillusionment and apathy. Then came a new hope. And today, there is absolute confidence that we are on the right path in building a new nation. Not only have many things changed in the past 15 years, but we ourselves have profoundly changed as a nation. We see a new Russia, strong and independent, capable of standing up for itself. Once I went to the cities of Suzdal and Vladimir to do some sightseeing. While I was visiting a convent in Suzdal, somebody recognized me. And the Mother Superior came over to talk to me. And she told me, you know, Mr. Miller, over the past year, we have seen a drastic increase in the number of notes visitors leave asking us to pray for President Putin's health. She said, instead of the name, people simply write, the President of the Russian Federation. Vladimir Putin visited our monastery on the 9th of September 2005. It was the first time in history that the leader of Russia paid a visit to Mount Athos. Following a ceremonial reception at Karyes, the capital of Athos, Mr. Putin specifically visited the Iveron monastery. Just as we were driving off for Iveron, there was a mule standing beside the road. A police vehicle led the way. Next came my car, and the Russian president's car was following mine. And for some reason, this mule suddenly ran out onto the road, right in front of the president's car. The driver tried to steer around him, but the mule wiggled left and right and didn't let him pass. I assume the president realized there was something about this, so his vehicle went trailing behind the donkey. I can tell you, this has never happened in Athos before. A mule trotting in front of someone's vehicle and not letting it pass. That was the first time I ever saw that. And on our way back, we were passing by the very same place. So the police car drove by first. Then I did, and I saw that donkey standing in the same spot and watching our convoy, as if he had been waiting for us. And he let our two vehicles pass by like he didn't care. So we drove by and we stopped to see what was going to happen. Just as Mr. Putin's car appeared from around the corner, the mule instantly scurried onto the middle of the road and once again started running in front of us. Only this time, he was heading in the opposite direction, which was uphill and therefore more difficult. When the donkey slowed down, perhaps he was growing tired, Mr. Putin would also slow down. He didn't overtake him. Only when the donkey dropped into a walk and it became apparent he was out of breath did the presidential vehicle start to slowly veer left to skirt past him. But once the car was abreast of the mule, it stopped, and the animal also immediately froze on the spot. We were filming this from the other two vehicles. I can't tell you exactly how much time it took, but they spent a few minutes just standing next to one another. Now, I do not presume to draw any conclusion from this story, but I'm thinking that maybe it was some kind of sign for the president from the Virgin Mary, the patroness of Mount Athos. But I guess the president should know better what it was supposed to mean. He never comes to events unprepared. He spends many days preparing for his annual marathon press conference or call-in shows. And he is 100% focused on what he's doing. Every time he looks very tense or perhaps focused. Because whenever a president speaks, especially if it's a president like Putin, every word is extremely important. Mr. President, what is happening to our economy at the moment? Is that payback for Crimea? Maybe it's time to go ahead and say it.
No. This is not the price we have to pay for Crimea. This is actually the price we have to pay for our natural aspiration to preserve ourselves as a nation, as a civilization, as a state. You know, when I spoke at the Valdai Forum, I used our most recognizable symbol as a metaphor. It's a bear protecting his taiga. You see, if we continue the metaphor, sometimes I think that maybe it would be best if our bear just sat still. Maybe he should stop chasing pigs and boars around the taiga. Maybe he should be picking berries and eating honey instead. Maybe then people will leave him alone. No, they won't. They will always try to put him on a chain. And as soon as they put him on a chain, they will rip out his teeth and claws. And then, after all the teeth and claws are gone, who needs a bear? They'll just stuff it, and that's all. So it is not about Crimea. It's about us protecting our independence, our sovereignty, and our right to exist. This should be clear to everybody.
When this whole Crimea situation happened with its new wave of patriotism, we suddenly discovered that we had the army and the defense industry. Turns out that even though the liberal wing of your team insisted that the government shouldn't spend that much on defense, somehow we can once again be proud of our defense industry.
Without the defense industry and the army, we wouldn't be able to deal with international terrorists. This was the case even in the most difficult economic situation of the early 2000s. You know, officially we had 1.3 million troops in the armed forces, but I had a hard time putting together a force of 50,000 combat-ready troops. I had to bring units from the Far East. I had to bring Marines from the Arctic Fleet. Now the situation has changed drastically. Back then, the army was poorly equipped. It was miserable, really. The army was miserable and demoralized. By the way, I would like to take this opportunity and thank all our troops again. During the most difficult times, they basically carried our country on their shoulders. Even though the army was in a humiliating condition and they weren't even paid properly, they saved our country, and we're all very grateful to them.
There was this famous battle in 2000 between Company 6 of the 76th Airborne Division, that's about 100 paratroopers, and 1,000 to 1,200 terrorists. That's how big terrorist groups were in Chechnya back in those days. Our soldiers were extremely outnumbered.
My son was their commanding officer. They could hear him on the radio. His last words were, "We're going to tell the artillery to shell our position. Goodbye, guys." The battle went on the whole day. Only 6 out of 90 survived. 84 were killed.
We decided, the president decided, to visit this place. Back then, we didn't control the area. When the president was there, it was secure. But by the time special forces started pulling back, militants had shown up.
It's not your fault that the country is in this situation.
Счастье наше в том, что есть люди, оказались люди, которых вы воспитали, с которыми.
But we are blessed because you raised people who were willing to stop the downfall of our country.
И
somebody had to step in.
I called everyone after the 10th anniversary. Found everybody's addresses. Asked everyone what they needed, what sort of problems they were facing. And I ended up with this huge folder. In 10 days, I received a phone call. They said the president got the papers and wanted to meet. So every governor visited every family personally, asked about all the problems, came up with solutions to make sure it was all done before our meeting with the president in Moscow. He wanted to take care of the parents who lost their children. Our kids took an oath. They knew what they had signed up for.
Знаменитый этот бой, на мой взгляд,
I think this battle was a turning point in the Chechen War.
потому что боевики, террористы, которые против нас воевали, я думаю, после этого...
After this battle,
что сломить боевой дух...
the terrorists realized they couldn't break the morale of our troops.
И сегодняшняя армия, это, конечно...
Of course, today, our army is not what it was 15 years ago. The president orders an unscheduled inspection of the Eastern Military District, for example. And in a matter of hours, we have 156,000 troops ready. Thousands of armored vehicles, hundreds of jets and ships. We run a lot more exercises now. The situation is totally different from what it used to be. The army now feels like an army. The officers got their dignity back. Military service is now appealing and prestigious. If we don't have a strong army, we may not need anything else. The country may no longer be ours. Can you recall any moments of absolute happiness?
Hard to say. I could talk about our achievements, and all of them together give me some sort of satisfaction. Like when I look back and see where we used to be and what we've been able to do. Let's start with the country. We saved the country. We doubled GDP. If you look at the 2014 budget, it is 22 times what the government spent in 1999. People's incomes tripled. We used to have almost 42 million people living below the poverty line. Now this number is 2.8 times lower. All this allowed us to solve another important issue. See, in 1999, and in 2000 actually, our population decline was 929,000 people, I think, so almost a million. The gap between deaths and births was 1 million. If we continued to lose 1 million people a year, it would be disastrous. Russia would gradually cease to exist. Not only were we able to stabilize the situation, but we turned it around, and we've seen an increase in the population for 2 years in a row. Nobody believed it was possible. This is not only because we adopted the maternity capital program and other measures stimulating childbirth. The general atmosphere in Russia improved, and people are no longer afraid to have children. And this is actually a multiplier for everything we've done. So I guess when I think about all that, I feel satisfied.
This new sporting center is a real blessing to the village. The rig is 130 meters tall. That's 2 Spasskaya towers, and it's bigger than a football field. This hospital has the best equipment in Europe. The power plant uses cutting-edge technology. All the equipment was manufactured in Russia. The university on Russky Island will be a top school that will attract students from all over the Far East. This is the starting point for Nord Stream. This is where Russian gas starts its way to Europe. For the first time ever, fantastic Formula One races will take place in Russia, in Sochi. The world's best pilots have come to the Olympic city. The church has its own concept of how the government should work.
какой должна быть власть. Причем это...
And it's not just something that I or my immediate predecessors came up with. We see this concept throughout church history.
Церковь связывает власть, особенно высших представителей власти, с непременным требованием.
The church believes that rulers must fully devote themselves to the service entrusted to them.
Нельзя сказать, что этот человек работает президентом.
Being president is not a job.
В качестве президента.
It's a service, and this says it all. Mr. Putin, 15 years in office. What does a person have to give up when he becomes president?
You have to give up your normal, everyday lifestyle. It's inevitable. You just can't live a normal life. You can't go to the movies, to the theater like a regular person. Can't go shopping, things we all enjoy doing. But it's a small price to pay for the opportunity you get when life and the people put you in a position like mine. It's an opportunity to do something. Do your best for your country and your people. It makes this all worth it.